I'm going to have a little family talk this morning. If you're sitting towards the back over here, if you don't mind, and even if you mind, I'd like you to move over and sit, because there's just some things that I just need to share with the family. If you're a guest with us this morning, then you sit in on a family meeting. I don't do this very often. It seems like more and more I'm doing it, but anyway, just some things that I just feel is necessary that we share with you this morning. If you have your Bibles, you can open to the book of Romans chapter 8. Normally I try to move around a lot, keep you awake, and I get excited so I can preach the message, but this morning it's not a preaching message. It's a little bit different. A few weeks ago, Mandy was in town, and my little great nephew Chandler was talking to Mandy, and they were talking, and he was saying, you know, who's your daddy? And, you know, that's my daddy, and pointing to my nephew Drake, and says, who's your daddy? And she pointed to me, and it kind of startled him. And he turned around and he said these words that everybody just laughed, didn't expect that. He said, I didn't see that coming. And he said it, you know, Chandler's got a little Cajun. Mace, I didn't see that coming. And I mean, it just surprised all of us. How many times in your life something has happened and you didn't see it coming? I think all of us could say that. I didn't see it coming. I like what Jeremy said, that we need to expect the unexpected. He's talking from the positive side. This morning I'm going to talk from the negative side. That you expect the unexpected. How to prepare for the uncertainties of life. Because see, we don't always know what's going to happen tomorrow. But isn't it interesting that society, people are fascinated with tomorrow, with the future. They're fascinated to find out what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's why fortune tellers and psychic readers just have a decent business. I like what one person said, if they can see the future, why don't they just put down the Powerball and win all that money every time? Because they can't. But there is something that they do. They connect in the realm of the spirit. Now, I'm not going to get into that, but you realize, you know, there was a tabloid, and I guess it's still open. I don't read much of those. It says, curious minds want to know. You know, we're interested in tomorrow. We're interested in the possibility, the percentage of the possibilities of this taking place or this happening. You know, if I could just know what's going to happen tomorrow, if I just know what's going to happen next week, if I just know what's going to happen a year from now, I would do things a certain way. I would be prepared. Do you know that there's a blood test now that you can take, and it'll tell you what's the percentage that you would contract Alzheimer's disease? Got to thinking, I don't know if I want to know that. Because there is no cure for it, so if you know, is it going to create more panic and more worry? Am I going to start looking for all of the symptoms? I just don't know if I want to know that. You see, it's interesting. A lot of Christians get really excited. New baby Christians get excited to read the book of Revelation. Why? Because they want to know what the future has. They want to know when's the rapture going to come. They want to know what's going to take place in the end times. And they read it and they said, I still don't understand. I still don't know. And so they read and they study. And why? Because they want to know when's the end of the world. They want to know what to expect. They want to know all of those things. You know, at the beginning of the summer, we get a prognostication from our weatherman. He tells us that we're expecting anywhere from 8 to 12 storms this year. There will be 3 to 5 major named storms and maybe 1 or 2 major storms. This year is down from last year. Thank God we haven't seen any storms in South Louisiana in a number of years. I believe there's a reason for that. I say this in jest. I thank God that Al Gore invented the internet. So he claims. But because of the internet, we can find information about things that we would not ordinarily find. Have you ever done this? And I did this week. I went and I typed in apocalyptic events that never happened. Events that were predicted that were the main headline at the time that never happened. And there was Halley's Comet in 1910 and 1986. I wasn't around in 1910. I'm old, but not that old. But I do remember the threat and the headlines of nuclear war imminent between Russia and the United States in the 1950s and 1960s. I didn't know this. 1975, there was the threat of an ice age because the planet is cooling. That didn't happen. So now we have global warming and we're going to all burn up. Things that were predicted that didn't happen. How many of you know the Y2K scare in 1999? How many of you remember the 88 reasons why Jesus is going to come in 1988 and take it and this will be the end of the world? How many of you remember Planet X, 2003, 2012, and now he's making its debut again? Now, we can laugh at those events. The Jupiter effect, you remember that one? I didn't know that one was anything. 1982 was a Jupiter effect. I thought that was when Luke was born. That's when all the planets were supposed to line up and was going to suck everything into the sun. It didn't happen. The star holocaust in 2000, planet Elenin in 2011, the killer bees of 1980. The Mayan calendar and the end of planet Earth in 2012. Over and over, there were apocalyptic events that were predicted. And then we're not talking anything about the medical and the pandemics that were supposed to sweep the world. There was the swine flu and the bird flu and the mad cow disease and SARS and Ebola. And all of these things were all predicted, but nothing happened. Now you can go back to the internet and put in pending apocalyptic events. These are those that didn't happen, but now what about those that are still predicted? And you know, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that we cannot be certain about anything, but that the sun, well, is supposed to rise tomorrow morning. But according to some of these potentials, some of these predictions, it may not. Now, we've got wildfires and volcanoes erupting in Iceland and Japan, earthquakes in Chile, Japan, and the big one in California, tsunamis in the Oregon and the Caribbean, the prediction that the East Coast is actually sinking, and that before the year 2050 it will be 3 feet underwater. There are major. There's the prediction that there's an asteroid that's going to hit around Puerto Rico, and it's going to flood 100 miles into the eastern coast and the Gulf Coast. And if that's the case, what can we do? There's major solar storms that are predicted. They're called electromagnetic pulse. They're called coronal mass ejections. These are things that are scientific, that are being predicted. There's economic collapse of all of the financial markets. When we look at the debt crisis in Europe and Argentina, Puerto Rico, and Greece, and the debt that our country is in, that's the biggest potential. I'm not here to tell you that these things are going to happen or they're not going to happen, because I don't know. But what I am here to tell you is that I want to encourage you to be prepared for the uncertainties in life. You know, the Bible talks about an event that is going to take place and has been predicted ever since Jesus went to heaven. There's been an event called the rapture that people have been talking about for centuries. And those who talked about it the most always said, and it's going to happen in my lifetime. Two dear friends, my spiritual father, a man on our board of directors, both made that claim. They're both in heaven today. Will that happen in our lifetime? I can't be certain that it will, but I can't be certain that it won't. But the thing that we've always been taught, I have adhered to the teaching that it's going to happen before everything gets bad. It's going to happen, and I'm going to be on the first busload. It's going to happen, and I'm not going to go through the, quote, the 7 years tribulation. I've been doing some more research, a little bit more reading, a little bit more study. And there's no real certainty that it's going to take place before there's some major tribulation that the church is going to go through. You see, when you look at the 7 years, and I'm not going to give a major detailed explanation of it, but you look at the 7 years, and the first 3.5 years has to do with the church being persecuted and going through tribulation and going through difficulties and going through attacks. What is ISIS doing? They're cutting heads off of Christians, both men, women, and children. Why didn't the rapture happen before that took place? Is that the potential that we're going to go through? Are we prepared as a believer and as a person to go through 3.5 years of persecution and tribulation, and as I would say in French, some tracas? Because you see, the last 3.5 years is God pouring out His wrath on planet Earth. But you got to know that God will not pour out His wrath on His people. So there's indication that we're gonna see some starts and some beginnings of the rumblings and the earthquakes and the famines and the different things. Look, go to Romans chapter 8 and verse number 35. He says, who will separate us from the love of Christ? Notice what he says. So tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword. The answer to that question is none of those things will ever separate us from the love of Christ, but he did not say in that case that we would not experience those things. That there is a potential for those things to happen even from the time that the gospel was written, till from the time the Bible was written, until the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. And then verse 37, he says, yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. In other words, if you experience any of those things in your life, God said, or Paul says, that you are going to be able to conquer, you're going to be able to overcome. Listen, there's no victory without a battle. There's no overcoming without a struggle. There's no really jubilation and glory and without there being a sword or famine or hard times or difficulty. Listen, we've got to be prepared. You know, listen, I understand this is a faith church, okay? But as a faith church, I believe as the pastor, as the father, as the head of the church, God is instructing, I believe instructs us that we need to prepare our people. That our people need to be ready for whatever comes. Yes, ready for the raises and the promotions and the bonuses, and expect those things, and not necessarily go around wringing our hands and worrying, God, I hope nothing bad happens to me today. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, God, if anything bad does happen to me, I'm not going to panic. You see, you got to realize that there has to be, I want to encourage you to be prepared for the uncertainties of life. I've got to know whose report am I going to believe. I've got to know, and I'm going to let the prognosticators prognosticate and predict. I'm going to let them do all of that they want to do, but I'm going to stand on God's word. Because you see, I've got to know that there may be something that will happen that is just, let me go back and say it this way. There's two ways that I can prepare, or two venues or avenues or zones that I have to prepare. One, I have to prepare in the natural. I've got to prepare in the natural. What do I mean? You know, when Rob Perillo or one of the newscasters tells us that there's a hurricane out in the Gulf, what do? You go buy a few extra bottles of water. You be sure your flashlights are working. You get some extra batteries. You dig out that little old handheld radio that you have in the bottom drawer somewhere, and you be sure that the batteries haven't corroded and that it still works so that you can listen to the radio, at least hear the weather. You buy, I don't know about you, get a couple of extra containers of peanut butter, maybe a little bit of extra. You check your if you have a generator, a gas-powered generator, you make sure the gas is not stale, and you start the generator, you make sure it works, and you make sure that you can at least have power. If you got a little portable air conditioner, you install it in the room. Why? You're getting prepared. Because if it comes this way, there's more than likely that you'll be out of electricity for 1 or 2, maybe 3 days. When Hurricane Lily came by in 2001, we were out of electricity for almost a week. But guess what? I had a gas-powered generator, and I'd crank my generator up, and I kept my refrigerators and my freezers and all my meat working and operative, so that every hour or so I'd just turn it on, and I saved all of that. Didn't lose that calf I had just butchered and put in the freezer. What was I doing? I was preparing. And so for you and I, you've got to understand, what do I need to do when a disaster or something happens that's within my control? I prepare. Maybe it's extra foodstuffs. Maybe it's extra batteries. Maybe it's copies, and absolutely copies of vital documents that you need to have. Those are all common sense type of things. Each family has to do as the Lord leads them to do. I can't give you a list, do this, do this, do this. No, you have to determine for yourself and your family what is essential for you. Are you prepared for 3.5 years? I don't know. Are we prepared for an electromagnetic pulse? Can we prepare? I believe there's some things we can do. And are we prepared for 3 years of attack, some type of persecution? You see, in the natural, there's that preparation season. You remember in Genesis when Pharaoh had the dream of these 7 fat cows? And then after they had 7 skinny cows, and the 7 skinny cows ate up the 7 fat cows. And Pharaoh said, man, what is that? So Joseph was ushered in, and Joseph not only had the interpretation of the dream, but he had the plan in order to overcome. He said the 7 fat cows are the years of abundance, the years of plenty, the years that you are supposed to prepare. Listen, you know, back in the 80s, it was interesting because we had a downturn in the oil industry, and there were bumper stickers all over that says, the last person out of Lafayette, turn out the lights. And I was right in the middle of the oil field. Dad and I had our oil well company. And you know, we didn't have a big fancy building. We didn't have all brand new cars. Our equipment was old. Our building was a rental building. We didn't have a whole lot, but everything we had was paid for. And those companies who had bought the camps at Toledo Bend and the camps in Florida and built the camp on Big Lake and built the camp here and built the camp there, those companies were folding up. Why? Because in the years of abundance, they were spending it all and not preparing. You see, God gave Joseph the plan. He says, tax the people 20% of their harvest. And build granaries, build places, and store all of this. And they did that for 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, a drought came. And the famine started. And probably a year or two, people had stuff. And so they said, hey, Pharaoh taxed us. We're going to go to Pharaoh because he's going to help us. And so they went to Joseph, and I'm still amazed at this. They taxed the landowners, and then when they went to get their food, he sold it to them. So he sold it to them, and when they ran out of money, he said, hey, I'll take your land. So they signed over their land, and that's how Pharaoh got rich. Because he got rich on the people. Why? Because of one man's foresight to prepare. Now, I believe this whole scenario was a preparation for God to save his nation Israel. Israel and his 12 sons, or his 11 sons and their families, they went to Egypt. There were 70 people, and there's a whole story that goes along with that, and I'm not prepared to go into all the detail, but God was isolating and insulating his people Israel in a land of Goshen when the nation of the whole world was going through famine and difficulties. God's people were protected. But now more than likely there was some famine there also. But God protected them. There was a reason. So what I'm saying is this. Listen, when you have an abundance, don't spend it all. Use that abundance to prepare And listen, if nothing happens, if all the predictions never come to pass, what have you lost? Nothing. But if one of them comes to pass, then you can be sitting pretty. Why? Because you've prepared because of potential uncertainties. Now, if something is outside of our control, I don't know if a meteor is going to hit in Puerto Rico at the end of September. That's what we're reading on the internet. I don't know. Guess what? If it does, we better be living northwards of Shreveport. If we're not, then we'll all be in heaven. You see, the threat of that doesn't bother me. Because, see, I can cast that care on God. I'm not going to fear. I'm not going to worry. Listen, I'm a child. Now, this may sound strange to you, but I'm a child of God. I can't be threatened with death. Death is victory. Death is a promotion. Now, am I going to miss some things on planet Earth? Absolutely. I'm going to miss Crawfish Etouffee. I'm going to miss Brandon. I'm going to miss Jeremy and Luke and Sherry and Natalie. I'm going to miss Emery. I'm going to miss my honey. But you know what? And I'm going to miss you. But more than likely, if that happens, we all gone. That's not in our control. Unless you decide that the Spirit of God tells you, you decide, I'm moving to Shreveport. Well, we'll help you pack. But I'm not moving. Now, at least not at this moment. Let me say it that way.